Save me," begged the Apache girl hanging from the tree. The cowboy saved her for a price. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the jagged ridges of the Arizona plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was dry, carrying the faint smell of dust and sagebrush, and the distant cry of a hawk echoed through the canyons. A lone cowboy rode slowly along a narrow dirt path, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dirt with every step. He had been on the trail since early morning, moving from one small settlement to the next, selling supplies and listening to the rumors that traveled faster than the wind in these parts. Life on the frontier was hard, unforgiving, and often lonely, but the cowboy had grown used to it. He preferred it that way. Solitude had a rhythm, a strange comfort in the vast emptiness of the plains. As he rode, he scanned the horizon carefully. Every rock outcropping, every shadowed canyon could hide danger, wild animals, bandits, or worse. He had learned to trust his instincts. Years on the trail had honed them like a finely sharpened knife. Still, nothing could have prepared him for the sound that reached his ears at that moment. A scream, sharp, desperate, and high-pitched, cut through the quiet hum of the evening. It was unlike anything he had heard before. There was panic in the voice, fear so raw that it sent a shiver down his spine. The cowboy tightened his grip on the reins, his eyes darting toward the source of the cry. At first he saw nothing but the canyon walls and the twisted scrubby trees that clung stubbornly to the rocky soil. Then his eyes caught a movement high above him, and his heart skipped a beat. A young girl was hanging from a tree, her small hands tied tightly to a branch, her body dangling above the ground. Her dress was torn and dusty, her hair matted with dirt and sweat, and her face was streaked with tears. She looked down at the cowboy with wide, terrified eyes, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to call for help again. "Save me!" she cried, her voice cracking. "Please, someone, help me!" The cowboy's horse whinnied nervously, sensing the tension in the air. The cowboy dismounted quickly, landing softly on the dusty ground. He moved cautiously toward the tree, scanning the surrounding cliffs and underbrush. There was no one else in sight, but he knew better than to trust appearances. In these parts, silence often hid threats, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Still, the sight of the girl struck a chord in him, a pang of responsibility he could not ignore. He had seen suffering before, but something about this girl, so small, so vulnerable, made it impossible to turn away. "Hey, hold on! I'll get you down!" he shouted, trying to keep his voice steady, though his heart pounded like a drum. The girl's eyes widened even more, relief mingling with fear. She shifted slightly, her arms straining against the ropes, and he could see the raw marks on her wrists. He knew he had to act quickly. Time was dangerous in the desert, and every second she hung there could bring more harm. The cowboy approached the tree slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. He had no tools with him other than the knife at his belt, but he knew that would be enough. He reached up, carefully cutting the ropes, and the girl's body slumped into his arms. She was light, smaller than he expected, and shivering with fear and exhaustion. "You're safe now," he said gently, trying to reassure her. She looked up at him with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Her eyes were filled with questions, but she didn't speak. The cowboy realized that words were not enough. She needed calm, steady hands and a sense that she was no longer alone. He laid her down on the soft patch of earth beneath the tree. She curled up slightly, still trembling, and buried her face in her hands. The cowboy scanned the surrounding area once more. There were no signs of anyone else. No bandits, no tracks, no weapons. But the desert had a way of hiding danger, and he knew this could only be the beginning of her ordeal. He offered her water from his canteen, which she took with trembling hands, sipping carefully. Each drop seemed to give her a bit more strength, and slowly, her shaking began to ease. Finally she looked up at him, her eyes full of fear and gratitude. Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The cowboy nodded, keeping his expression neutral, but inside, a storm of questions raged. Who had done this to her? Why was she left here? And most importantly, how could he get her to safety without putting them both at risk? He had been on the trail long enough to know that every act of kindness had consequences, and helping a girl in the middle of nowhere could bring trouble faster than he could ride away. The girl's clothes were torn and dusty, and the sun was dropping lower, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. The cowboy offered her his coat, and she hesitated for a moment before slipping it over her shoulders. She was small, and the coat hung loosely on her frame, but it offered some warmth against the evening chill. She looked up at him again, this time with a faint smile, a tiny spark of hope flickering in her eyes. It was a fragile thing, but it was enough to strengthen his resolve. He helped her to her feet, supporting her as she regained her balance. Her legs were weak from hanging for so long, but she managed to stand. "We need to move," he said quietly. "There could be people following you, and we can't stay here." She nodded silently, too scared to speak, but trusting him enough to follow. Together they began the slow journey back to the trail, moving carefully through the rocky terrain. Every step was cautious, every shadow and sound scrutinized. The desert was beautiful, but it was also unforgiving, and they both knew that danger could come from anywhere. As they walked, the cowboy kept glancing at her, noticing the small details that told him more about her than words could. Her hands were still raw from the ropes, her face dirty but marked with resilience, and her eyes held a mix of fear, determination, and a quiet intelligence. She was more than just a victim. She was a survivor, and he realized that helping her was not just an act of kindness. It was a responsibility he could not take lightly. The canyon walls rose on either side of them, narrowing the path and making it feel like they were walking through a tunnel of rock. The sun dipped lower, and the temperature began to drop quickly, the cold desert air cutting through their clothes. The cowboy adjusted his coat around her shoulders and whispered words of reassurance. "It's going to be okay. I'll make sure you're safe." She clung to him slightly, her trust fragile but growing with each careful step. The bond between them, silent and unspoken, began to form, a bond forged in fear and the promise of survival. The wind picked up, whistling through the canyon like a ghostly voice, and the cowboy's mind raced with plans. He had to get her to safety, but he also had to think ahead. The desert was vast, and help was scarce. Every settlement was miles away, and every shadow could hide danger. Yet, despite the risk, he felt an undeniable pull to protect her, to make sure she survived this night. It was not just duty. It was a sense of humanity that refused to let him walk away. Hours seemed to pass as they moved carefully through the canyon, the girl leaning on him for support, her eyes wide and alert. He could see the exhaustion etched on her small frame, and he knew they needed rest soon. Yet he also knew that stopping in the open desert could be dangerous. They needed a safe place, somewhere hidden from view, where they could regroup and plan their next move. The cowboy's mind worked quickly, scanning the landscape for any signs of shelter. A small overhang in the rocks appeared ahead, offering a momentary refuge from the chill and the wind. He guided her there, helping her settle as comfortably as possible on the uneven ground.
As the night began to fall, the girl finally spoke, her voice trembling.
Why did you help me?" she asked, her eyes searching his. The cowboy paused, looking down at her. He had no simple answer. In a world where trust was rare and danger constant, acts of kindness came at a cost. Yet he simply said, "Because no one deserves to be left like that, you needed help." His voice was calm but firm. It was enough for her, for now. She nodded, leaning back against the rocks, and for the first time since he found her, she allowed herself to breathe without panic. The night grew darker, and the stars began to appear, scattered across the vast desert sky. The cowboy sat quietly, keeping watch as the girl rested, his mind still alert for any sign of danger. He knew this was only the beginning. The story of why she was in that tree, who had left her there, and what lay ahead for both of them had yet to unfold. But for now, in this quiet moment under the desert sky, they were safe. And in the cowboy's heart, a determination grew stronger, to protect her, to guide her, and to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning sun broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The air was still crisp, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth. The cowboy stirred, careful not to wake the girl, who had slept fitfully through the night. Her small body was curled against the rock, her breathing uneven but steady, a quiet reminder of the ordeal she had survived. He had spent the night watching the canyon, every sense alert. In these parts, danger could come from anywhere, wild animals, outlaws, or even unexpected enemies, and he knew they couldn't afford to linger. As he prepared to move, the girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked against the sunlight, still trying to shake off the remnants of fear that clung to her. Where are we going?" she asked quietly, her voice timid but filled with curiosity. The cowboy offered her a small smile, though his face remained guarded. "Somewhere safe," he said simply. "We need to get to a place where you won't be found. Then we can figure out what comes next." She nodded slowly, still unsure if she could trust him completely, but the memory of hanging from that tree and the horror she had felt made her willing to follow. They set off slowly, the girl walking beside him, her small hand brushing against his coat as if seeking reassurance. The terrain was rough, full of jagged rocks and steep inclines, and the cowboy helped her over obstacles, keeping a careful eye on the horizon. He noticed how tense she remained, her eyes constantly scanning the cliffs and the scrub for any sign of danger. Even in her fear, she was alert, aware of the dangers around them. Her survival instincts were sharp, and the cowboy silently admired her courage. As they moved, the girl began to speak, haltingly at first. I was taken," she said, her voice trembling. "Some men, they wanted something from my father. They didn't care about me." She looked down ashamed, as if speaking aloud would somehow make the memory more real. The cowboy nodded, listening patiently. He had heard many stories of hardship in his years on the trail, but there was a raw honesty in her words that cut through the usual tales of fear and greed. He knew she was telling the truth, and he also knew that helping her now meant he was stepping into a situation that could bring real danger. "Do you know where they went?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No. They took me through the canyon. I didn't see where they went after." Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard, trying to hold back tears. The cowboy put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. You're safe now. That's what matters." She nodded. Though the tension in her body didn't fully relax, he could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. But he also saw determination, an unwillingness to be broken by what had happened. The morning passed slowly as they made their way through the rocky terrain. The cowboy kept a careful watch, scanning every ridge and shadow, while the girl stayed close, her small footsteps barely making a sound. At times she would stumble or lag behind, and he would gently guide her forward, encouraging her with quiet words. "You're doing fine." Just a little farther. She began to rely on his guidance, learning to trust him in a way that she hadn't trusted anyone in a long time. As they moved, the cowboy noticed signs that they were not alone. A broken branch here, a fresh set of footprints there, subtle signs that told him someone might be following them. He didn't panic, but he kept the girl close, urging her to stay quiet and move quickly. "We're not safe yet," he whispered. "Keep close to me and don't make a sound." She nodded, gripping his coat as if it were a lifeline. The desert, beautiful in its emptiness, suddenly felt alive with unseen eyes, watching and waiting. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon that offered some protection from the sun. The cowboy found a small alcove in the rock where they could rest without being easily seen. He encouraged the girl to sit, offering her water from his canteen. She drank slowly, her hand still trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." The cowboy shrugged slightly, hiding the weight of responsibility he already felt. "You would have survived, but I'm glad I was here. That's all that matters." The girl rested for a moment, then began to ask questions. "Who are you?" she said softly. "Why do you help me?" The cowboy hesitated. He was a man of few words, and he had learned long ago that explanations were not always necessary. But he saw the genuine curiosity in her eyes and decided to answer honestly. "I'm just a man who knows what it's like to be alone. And sometimes You do what you can to help someone else. That's all. She nodded thoughtfully, as if she understood more than he realized. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they walked again, helping to ease some of the tension. The cowboy shared stories of his travels, of small towns, and the people he had met along the way. The girl listened intently, her fear momentarily forgotten, as she became absorbed in the tales of distant places and adventures. For a short while, the harshness of the desert faded, replaced by a sense of companionship and trust. She began to relax, walking a little taller, her steps more confident. Yet, as the afternoon sun climbed higher, the cowboy knew that the danger was not gone. They needed to reach a settlement before nightfall, somewhere safe where the girl could find shelter and he could plan their next move. The desert, though stunningly beautiful, was unforgiving, and the cowboy understood that staying in the open was not an option. He guided her carefully, pointing out safe paths and areas to avoid. "Stay close," he reminded her. "And trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." She nodded, absorbing his words like a lesson she would carry for life. As they neared a small creek, the cowboy noticed signs that someone had been there recently. Footprints in the mud, broken twigs, and faint traces of a campfire. His senses sharpened immediately. "Someone's been this way," he said quietly. "We need to be careful. They could be tracking us." The girl's eyes widened, fear returning in full force. She gripped his arm tightly, and he squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll stay ahead. Just follow me and trust me." They followed the creek for several miles, the water providing a path through the rugged terrain. The cowboy kept his eyes on the surroundings, alert for any movement, while the girl stayed close, learning to move quietly and cautiously. She was beginning to understand the rhythm of survival in the desert. The way to move, the way to listen, and the way to stay unseen. It was a harsh lesson, but one she absorbed quickly, driven by fear and the need to survive. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge that offered a view of a small settlement in the distance. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the sounds of daily life carried faintly on the wind. The cowboy felt a small measure of relief. They were close to safety, but the journey was not over. They had to reach the settlement without being noticed, especially by those who might still be searching for the girl. He turned to her, giving her a nod of encouragement. "Almost there. Stay close and keep your head down." "We'll make it." She nodded, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. As they descended toward the settlement, the cowboy reflected on the girl's story. It was clear she had been through a terrifying ordeal, and her resilience impressed him. She was no longer just a frightened child. She was someone who had survived against the odds, and he had played a part in that survival. But he also knew that helping her now would have consequences. In this land, every action carried a cost, and protecting someone in danger could attract more trouble than he had anticipated. Yet, despite the risks, he was determined to see it through. As they approached the outskirts of the settlement, the cowboy's instincts warned him to stay alert. The streets were quiet, but that was often when danger was closest. He led the girl to a small alley, where they could pause and observe before moving further. "We'll take it slow," he whispered. "No sudden moves. Stay behind me and everything will be fine." The girl obeyed, her trust in him evident in the way she followed his instructions without hesitation. Finally, as the sun dipped low and the first stars began to appear, they moved cautiously into the settlement. The cowboy's heart still pounded with caution, but he allowed himself a small measure of hope. They were safe for now, and the girl was alive. The journey ahead would be difficult, and there were questions to answer, dangers to face, and lessons to learn. But for this moment, they had survived, and that was enough. The settlement was small, just a cluster of wooden houses with dust-strewn streets and smoke curling from chimneys. Children ran barefoot along the dirt roads, playing as their parents watched from porches, and the air smelled faintly of baked bread and livestock. It was a place where everyone knew each other, and newcomers were immediately noticed. The cowboy and the girl moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows of buildings and keeping to the edges of the main street. Every step required care, The cowboy knew that even a moment of distraction could bring danger. The girl's eyes were wide as she took in the settlement. She had spent much of her life near her village, but this place was different. Busy, alive, and unfamiliar. She glanced at the cowboy, whose face remained calm but alert, and she felt a strange mix of trust and anxiety. She didn't know this man fully, but he had already saved her life, and in that simple act he had earned her loyalty. As they moved deeper into the settlement, the cowboy kept an eye out for anyone who might recognize the girl or be connected to those who had taken her. His instincts told him that the danger was not over, that someone could be watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. He led her to a quiet alley behind a small general store, where they could pause and catch their breath. The girl sank down against the wall, exhausted, her hands trembling slightly as she hugged her knees. "Are you okay?" the cowboy asked quietly. She nodded, though her eyes still reflected the trauma of the past days. "I think so," she whispered. I don't understand why this happened to me." The cowboy crouched beside her, his voice calm and steady. "Sometimes people do bad things because they think it will get them what they want. That doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean you deserved it. You're safe now, and that's what matters." She looked at him, her eyes searching for reassurance. "But what if they come back?" The cowboy's expression darkened slightly. He had expected this question.
They might. That's why we have to be careful. But
"We can't let them find you, and we need to think about what to do next. You're not alone anymore. I'll make sure you stay safe." The girl stayed silent for a moment, then asked another question, softer this time. Why me?" The cowboy shook his head slowly. "I don't know why you were chosen, and I don't think you'll ever understand it. Some things don't make sense. But I do know this. You survived, and that means you have a chance to keep going. That's what matters now." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a horse trotting down the street. Both of them froze, and the cowboy instinctively moved to shield the girl. He peered around the corner and saw a man riding slowly, scanning the settlement. He didn't recognize him immediately, but there was something about the way the man looked around, cautious and calculating, that set the cowboy's instincts on edge. "They're out here," he whispered, almost to himself. The girl's eyes widened. "Who?" The cowboy shook his head. "People who might have been looking for you. We need to stay hidden until we know it's safe." He guided her further into the alley, pressing her against the wall. Together they waited, watching as the man's horse disappeared down the street. The tension lingered even after the rider was gone. The cowboy knew that the girl's presence in the settlement could attract attention, and he had to find a solution before nightfall. He decided to take her to a trusted friend on the outskirts of town, a man who ran a small farm and owed him a favor from years ago. The journey would be short, but they had to move carefully. As they walked toward the edge of the settlement, the girl's curiosity got the better of her. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. The cowboy didn't answer immediately. He knew the story he was about to tell her would not be easy to hear. Finally, he said, "We're going to someone I trust. He will give us a place to stay for the night, somewhere safe where no one will find us. But we have to be careful. Safety doesn't come easily." The girl nodded, absorbing his words. She had already learned that life on the plains was harsh, and that trust was rare. She followed him closely, her steps quiet on the dusty road. Along the way, he noticed how observant she was, how she took in every detail of the buildings, the streets, and the people. She was learning quickly, and he realized that her mind was as sharp as her courage was strong. They reached the edge of the settlement just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The light painted the plains in a golden hue, casting long shadows across the land. The cowboy led the girl along a narrow path that wound through low hills and scrub, keeping them out of sight from the main road. It was a quiet path, but he knew that danger could still be near. Every step was deliberate, every sound analyzed for potential threats. Finally, they arrived at the farm. It was a modest place with a small wooden house, a few barns, and a fenced area for livestock. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the faint sound of someone moving inside could be heard. The cowboy knocked lightly on the door. A man opened it, his face breaking into a warm smile when he recognized the cowboy. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said. The cowboy nodded. "I need a favor. Can you keep someone safe for the night?" The man looked at the girl, then back at the cowboy, understanding immediately. "Of course," he said. "Come in, quickly." They stepped inside, and the cowboy finally allowed himself a moment to relax. The girl's eyes widened as she took in the warmth of the house, the smell of cooking food, and the feeling of safety. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. Inside, she sat by the fire, her small hands warming against the heat. The cowboy stayed nearby, watching over her, but also taking a moment to plan. He knew that helping her would not be simple, that there were dangers still waiting beyond the farm. He also knew that the girl was stronger than she appeared, capable of understanding the risks and learning how to protect herself. As they sat together, the girl finally spoke again. "Why did they take me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. The cowboy sighed, knowing that the truth would not be easy. Sometimes people do terrible things for their own gain. They see someone vulnerable and think they can control them. That doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean you're weak. You're strong, and that's why I brought you here, to keep that strength alive. She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She had learned in the past days that survival depended on courage, trust, and quick thinking. She also understood that the cowboy was not just a protector but a guide, someone who could help her navigate the dangers she had faced. She felt a connection to him, a bond formed not through words but through shared experience and mutual respect. As night fell, the farm settled into quiet. The girl lay on a small bed provided by the farmer, finally able to rest without fear of immediate danger. The cowboy sat nearby, keeping watch, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. He knew that this was only a temporary reprieve, that the challenges were far from over. But for now, the girl was safe, and that was enough. In the quiet moments, the cowboy reflected on the girl's journey and his own. He had seen fear, courage, and resilience in her eyes, and he knew that she was no ordinary child. She had survived horrors that would have broken many, and she had done so with a quiet determination that inspired him. He also knew that the coming days would test them both, forcing them to confront dangers and make difficult choices. The girl slept peacefully, her breathing steady, and the cowboy felt a rare sense of calm. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting warm light on their faces. The desert outside remained harsh and unforgiving, but inside the farm there was a sense of safety, a temporary haven where they could regroup and prepare for the challenges ahead. The night passed quietly, but the cowboy knew that dawn would bring new decisions. The girl would need guidance, protection, and encouragement, and he was ready to provide it. He understood that helping her was not just about keeping her alive. It was about teaching her to survive, to trust wisely, and to face the world with courage. And as the first light of morning crept over the horizon, he resolved to see this journey through, no matter the cost. The next morning, the sun rose over the small farm, spilling light over the dusty fields and the distant hills. The air was crisp and birds sang quietly, but the calm was deceptive. The cowboy knew that the real danger had not passed. Whoever had taken the girl could still be out there searching for her, and they would not stop easily. He had spent enough time on the trail to understand that danger often arrived when least expected. The girl awoke slowly, rubbing her eyes, and looked around at the small, warm room. The farm felt safe compared to the desert, but she knew that safety was temporary. She had learned that lesson the hard way. She glanced at the cowboy, who was already awake, standing by the window and surveying the surrounding fields. There was a quiet strength in his posture, a confidence that made her feel protected, even though fear still lingered in the corners of her mind. "Are they coming?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The cowboy turned to her, his expression calm but serious. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but we have to assume they might. That's why we need to be ready." He walked over to the small table and poured them both a cup of water. "Drink. Keep your strength up. You're going to need it." The girl nodded, taking the cup with trembling hands, and sipped slowly. She felt the warmth of the water as it slid down her throat, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to believe that things could be okay. After a short breakfast, the cowboy led the girl outside to the edge of the farm. They needed to plan their next move carefully. "We can't stay here too long," he said. "If they track you to this place, it could put everyone in danger. We need to find a safer route, somewhere hidden, until we can figure out our next step." The girl followed quietly, trusting his judgment. She had already learned that he was not only brave but wise, someone who could anticipate trouble before it arrived. As they walked along the perimeter of the farm, the cowboy explained the plan. They would use a series of hidden paths through the hills and valleys to reach a more remote area where no one would think to look. The journey would be dangerous, but staying in the settlement would be even riskier. The girl listened carefully, understanding the importance of moving quietly and watching for signs of trouble. She felt a mix of fear and determination. Fear of the unknown, but determination to survive and help herself along the way. They set out mid-morning, moving through narrow paths that twisted between hills and scrub. The girl stayed close, following the cowboy's lead, learning how to step lightly and avoid making noise. He taught her how to read the land, the small disturbances in the dust, the broken twigs, the tracks that animals or people left behind. Every lesson was vital, and she absorbed them quickly, her mind sharp despite the exhaustion from the past days. Hours passed as they carefully navigated the rough terrain. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive, but the cowboy encouraged the girl to keep going. "Stay focused," he said. "Keep your eyes open and don't let fear take over. You're stronger than you think." The girl nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead, and pushed herself to move faster. She was learning that survival depended not just on courage, but on awareness, on paying attention to every detail around her. As they reached a narrow canyon, the cowboy paused. He spotted fresh footprints in the dirt too deep and heavy to belong to a child. His eyes narrowed, scanning the canyon walls. "They're close," he whispered, his voice tense. The girl's heart raced. She clutched his arm tightly, her knuckles white. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice shaking. "People who want to find you," he said quietly. "We need to stay hidden and be ready." They crouched behind a large boulder, peering through the shadows. A group of men appeared at the edge of the canyon, moving cautiously, scanning the area for any sign of the girl. The cowboy's mind raced. He knew they couldn't outrun the men in a straight chase, and confrontation could be deadly. He needed a plan, and he needed to act quickly. He whispered instructions to the girl. "Stay low. Don't move unless I tell you. Follow my lead exactly." She nodded, her eyes wide but trusting him completely. The men moved closer, calling out for the girl, but the cowboy had chosen their hiding spot wisely. The boulder and the uneven terrain provided excellent cover. The girl's breath caught in her throat, but she stayed silent, obeying his every word. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, hearts pounding. The men searched the area carefully, but they were unaware of the cowboy and the girl hidden just beyond their sight. The cowboy observed their movements, calculating the best moment to act. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, they would have to move. Finally, he saw an opening. One of the men stepped too far from the group, distracted by the rocks and brush. The cowboy seized the moment, quietly signaling the girl to follow him. They slipped silently through the canyon, keeping low and using the shadows for cover. The men did not notice until it was too late. By the time they realized the girl was gone, she and the cowboy had already vanished into the maze of hills. The girl's heart was still racing, but she allowed herself a small smile. "We did it," she whispered. The cowboy nodded, keeping his eyes on the path ahead. "Not yet," he said. "We're not safe until we reach the next hiding place." They continued moving, the canyon walls providing temporary cover, but the tension never fully lifted. The desert was alive with danger, and they could not afford to relax. As the afternoon passed, the cowboy led the girl to a small cave tucked into the hillside. It was a natural shelter, hidden from view, with enough space for both of them to rest. He lit a small fire outside, just enough to keep watch, and instructed the girl to stay inside. "Stay here," he said. Don't come out unless I tell you. I'll be back shortly." She nodded, huddling against the cool rock walls, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. The cowboy crept through the hills, keeping his senses sharp. He watched the surrounding area for any signs of the men who had been searching for the girl. He noted their tracks, observed the terrain, and calculated the safest route back. He knew that staying in one place too long could be dangerous, but he also needed to ensure the girl was safe. Every step he took was measured, deliberate, and cautious. After several hours, the cowboy returned to the cave. The girl looked up, her eyes filled with curiosity and concern. "Did they follow us?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Not yet. We're still ahead, but we need to be careful. They won't give up easily." She nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She had seen enough to know that the cowboy was right. Danger was always close, and they could not take anything for granted. As night fell, the desert became quiet again, but the tension remained. The cowboy kept a small fire burning outside the cave, just enough to provide warmth and light, but not enough to reveal their position. The girl watched him, impressed by his careful planning and bravery. She realized that he was not only protecting her, but teaching her how to survive, how to think ahead, and how to stay calm under pressure. The night passed with only the distant sounds of animals and the wind moving through the hills. The girl rested, her body tired, but her mind alert. She had learned much in the past days, not just about danger, but about trust, courage, and resilience. The cowboy had become more than a protector. He had become a guide, someone who showed her that even in the harshest circumstances, survival was possible with courage and intelligence. By dawn, the cowboy had already planned their next move. They would continue through the hills, using hidden paths to avoid detection, and eventually reach a place where the girl could be safe long-term. The journey would not be easy, and the challenges ahead would test both of them, but they were prepared. Together they had survived the first wave of danger, and now they were ready to face whatever came next. The girl looked at the cowboy, a sense of admiration and trust growing stronger. "Thank you for saving me," she said softly. The cowboy nodded, his expression serious but kind. "We saved each other," he replied, "and we'll keep doing that until we're truly safe." The words carried a promise of protection, guidance, and courage in the face of uncertainty. The morning air was crisp as the cowboy and the girl continued their journey through the hills. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Every sound was amplified in the quiet desert, the crunch of their boots on gravel, the distant cry of a hawk, the wind moving through the sparse brush. The cowboy moved carefully, his eyes scanning the path ahead. He knew they were not out of danger yet. The men who had taken the girl once before were still somewhere in the distance, and they would not give up easily. The girl walked beside him, her steps careful but steady. She had grown stronger over the past days, learning to trust her instincts, to observe her surroundings, and to follow the cowboy's guidance. She had also learned something more important: courage. Despite the fear that lingered in the back of her mind, she had discovered that she was capable of facing challenges she never imagined she could survive. She glanced at the cowboy, admiration and trust evident in her eyes. "Do you think they'll come after us again?" she asked softly. The cowboy shook his head slightly, though his expression was serious. "Maybe. But even if they do, we're ready." "You've learned a lot in the past days. You're not helpless anymore." The girl nodded, feeling a small spark of pride. She realized that survival wasn't just about being strong or lucky. It was about thinking ahead, staying calm, and having someone to guide you through the dangers. And in the cowboy, she had found someone who had taught her all of that. They moved carefully along a narrow path that wound between hills and valleys. The cowboy stopped periodically, crouching behind rocks or low bushes, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. The girl followed quietly, learning to read the land as he had taught her. Every broken twig, every shift in the dirt told a story. She began to notice things she had overlooked before: the faint trail of footprints in the dust, the way the wind carried sounds across the canyon, the subtle shifts in shadows as the sun climbed higher. By midday, they reached a small, secluded stream. The water was clear and cool, a welcome relief from the long days of walking through the hot desert. The cowboy knelt beside it, filling a small container while the girl dipped her hands into the water to refresh herself. She drank carefully, feeling the cool liquid slide down her throat, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax, if only slightly. "It's beautiful," she whispered, looking around at the stream and the surrounding hills. The cowboy smiled faintly.
"It is," he said, "but beauty doesn't always mean safety."
"We need to stay alert. The path ahead is still dangerous." She nodded, understanding that even in places that seemed calm, danger could be hidden. The desert had taught her that lesson harshly, but she was ready to apply it. As they rested briefly by the stream, the cowboy spoke of the next step. "There's a small village further north. It's remote, and people there are friendly. They'll help you. But getting there won't be easy. The path winds through rough terrain, and we'll need to avoid the main roads to stay safe." The girl listened intently, absorbing every word. She trusted him completely now, not just because he had saved her life, but because he had shown her how to survive and think for herself. They continued their journey, moving carefully along hidden paths, avoiding the main roads and settlements. The sun climbed higher, and the heat pressed down on them, but neither faltered. The girl had learned to pace herself, to conserve energy, and to remain alert even when tired. She had also learned patience, the quiet determination to keep moving forward, even when the end seemed far away. By late afternoon, the terrain grew steeper. The hills rose sharply, and the paths narrowed, making movement slower and more difficult. The cowboy guided the girl carefully, helping her over rocks and through narrow passages. "Almost there," he said. "Stay close and keep your eyes open. We're close to safety." She nodded, gripping his arm for support, trusting him completely. As they climbed higher, they spotted smoke rising in the distance, a sign of the remote village. Relief washed over the girl, but the cowboy remained cautious. "We're not safe until we reach it," he reminded her. "We need to stay hidden until we know it's secure." They approached carefully, scanning the surrounding hills for any sign of danger. The village was quiet, and no strangers were in sight. It appeared to be a place where travelers could find help without attracting unwanted attention. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the village. Small wooden houses were scattered along dirt paths, and the air smelled of cooking food and fresh bread. Children played quietly near the homes, and the people moved about their daily chores. The cowboy led the girl to a small house on the edge of the village, knocking lightly on the door. An elderly woman opened it, her eyes kind and welcoming. "Can you help her?" the cowboy asked, gesturing toward the girl. The woman nodded immediately, understanding from the girl's appearance that she had been through a difficult ordeal. "Of course," she said softly. "Come inside." The girl stepped into the warm house, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't felt in days. For the first time, she felt safe. Inside, the girl was offered food, water, and a place to rest. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, while the cowboy spoke briefly with the woman. He explained that the girl had been in danger and needed a place to recover. The woman nodded, listening carefully, and promised to keep her safe. The cowboy glanced at the girl, giving her a small nod. "You're safe now," he said. Over the next few hours, the girl rested, gradually regaining her strength. She thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the danger, and the courage it had taken to survive. She realized how much she had learned in just a few days, how to trust, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to use her mind as well as her strength to face challenges. The cowboy had been her guide, teaching her these lessons not with words alone but with actions and example. As the sun began to set, the cowboy prepared to leave. He had done what he could to ensure her safety, but he knew that his path now led him elsewhere. He knelt beside the girl, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're ready now," he said softly. "You know how to stay safe, and you have people here who will help you. I'll be around if you ever need guidance, but this is your home now." The girl looked up at him, tears in her eyes, feeling a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The cowboy nodded, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "Remember, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when you're afraid." You've already shown that. Now it's time to live the rest of your life with that strength." He stood adjusting his coat and grabbing his hat. The girl watched as he walked toward the door, her heart heavy but grateful. Outside, the wind carried the sound of his horse's hooves as he rode away, disappearing into the horizon. The girl felt a mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a sense of independence she had never known before. She knew that she would never forget him, the cowboy who had saved her life, taught her courage, and guided her through the darkest moments of her journey. The village embraced her, offering comfort, community, and safety. She began to rebuild her life, stronger, wiser, and more resilient. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and she had survived, not just because of the cowboy, but because of the courage she discovered within herself. As she watched the sunset from the edge of the village, she remembered his words. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when you're afraid. Those words would stay with her forever, guiding her through the rest of her life. She smiled softly, feeling a quiet strength in her heart. She was safe, she was alive, and she was ready for whatever the future held. In the distance, the cowboy rode on, his silhouette blending with the golden hues of the sunset. He had saved the girl, yes, but he had also helped her discover the power within herself. For him, the journey continued. Another day, another path, another life to protect if needed. But in this moment, he could take quiet satisfaction in knowing that one more person had survived, stronger and wiser because of his courage and guidance. The girl's life had changed forever, and the lessons she had learned would guide her in every step ahead. She had faced the harsh desert, danger, and fear, and she had come through it stronger. And she would never forget the cowboy, the man who had saved her, taught her courage, and given her the chance to live free and safe. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, she felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had survived the unimaginable, and now she could look forward to a life filled with hope, strength, and courage. The journey had ended, but the lessons and memories would stay with her forever, a reminder of the bravery and kindness that had guided her through the darkest hours.